Kia was the youngest archivist in the great library of Thebes, a place that smelled of dry papyrus and dust. She preferred the company of scrolls to people, as scrolls rarely asked her to smile or make conversation. Her specialty was the books of breathing, essential manuals buried with the dead to help them navigate the afterlife without getting eaten by a demon. She organized them by dynasty, then by spell potency, and finally by how expensive the ink was. She spent her days in the dim corridors, her hands constantly stained with soot and reed dust. It was a quiet life, interrupted only by the occasional temple cat knocking over a stack of tax records. Most people found the silence of the library unsettling, claiming the shadows moved on their own. Kia simply ignored them, believing that if the shadows wanted to read, they should just get a library card. The trouble began when High Priest Mentu stormed in, his face a shade of purple that clashed horribly with his white linen robes. He announced that the scroll of the 7 gates, intended for the royal vizier's funeral at dawn, had vanished from its locked cedar chest. Without this scroll, the vizier's soul would be unable to pass the gates of the underworld and would likely spend eternity complaining. This was a terrifying prospect for everyone involved, as the vizier had been a notoriously grumpy man in life. Mentu paced the room, his sandals slapping against the stone floor like the ticking of a doom clock. He declared that the theft was an insult to the gods and a personal inconvenience to his schedule. He gave Kia until sunset to find it, or he would see to it that her next job involved cleaning the crocodile pins. She watched him leave, wondering if crocodiles were at least better listeners than high priests. Kia began her investigation at the cedar chest, examining the scene with the focus of a hawk spotting a field mouse. She observed how the wax seal had been snapped, not by brute force, but with terrifying precision. The bronze latch hung open in the dim light, looking less like a broken lock and more like a mouth left agape in surprise. Leaning closer, she spotted a peculiar smudge smeared across the metal, glowing with a vibrant, unearthly blue hue against the dark wood. It was a streak of pure indigo powder, the kind usually reserved for painting the ceilings of royal tombs to mimic the eternal night sky. The substance was not mere ink, but crushed lapis lazuli mixed with gold dust, glittering faintly under her lamp, as if it possessed its own internal light source. Such a messy application was baffling, looking as if a galaxy had been carelessly wiped against the furniture by a clumsy hand. Kia brushed her fingertip against the residue, expecting the grit of stone, but gasped as a shock of unnatural cold shot through her hand. It felt as though she had just touched the frozen heart of a winter night, a chill that certainly did not belong in the stifling heat of Thebes. She stepped into the sun-drenched colonnade to question Kinsu, a guard who treated his spear less like a weapon and more like a convenient leaning post for naps. He stood, blinking in the harsh light, swearing by every war god that his eyes had been wide open, despite the pillow marks clearly visible on his cheek. Under pressure, he admitted to hearing a rhythmic chiming echoing through the stone corridor, distinct and mournful, like the rattle of a funereal sistrum. He described the sound as heavy and metallic, the kind of noise that usually accompanies a weeping procession, rather than a silent heist. Kensu shivered as he recalled a sudden draft that had swept past him, a freezing wind that smelled of myrrh and turned his sweat to ice. It was a chilling physical memory that seemed impossible to fabricate, especially for a man whose imagination was usually limited to his next meal. Kia glanced back at the heavy library doors, troubled by the image of a ceremonial shaker chiming inside a sealed room. A common thief might pick a lock, but only a visitor from the grave would bring their own funeral music to a robbery. Kia moved to the rear alcove where a narrow window had been pried open, its heavy wooden shutters hanging askew on strained hinges. The rough limestone sill was marred with scratches, framing a blinding rectangle of white desert light that sliced through the library's gloom. Beyond the opening lay the jagged, sun-bleached cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, standing silent and imposing against the pale blue sky. It was a landscape of heat and ancient death, a forbidden place that no living thief would dare to run toward. Caught on a jagged splinter of the frame was a strip of gossamer linen, woven with a single thread of silver that glittered like a trapped star. The fabric was impossibly fine and cool to the touch, the distinct wrapping used only for the statues of gods within the inner sanctums. Before she could secure it, a sudden draft lifted the cloth from the wood, carrying it out into the open air, where it fluttered toward the western horizon. Kia watched it dance on the wind like a drifting spirit, pulling her gaze inevitably toward the silent tombs of the necropolis. Kia stood in the center of the library as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the room in blood-red light. She had the clues: indigo paint, a mourner's chime, and divine linen, but they pointed to a culprit that didn't make sense. Panic began to tighten her chest, for she knew the high priest would return any moment to demand the scroll. The thought of the crocodile pens was becoming less of a threat and more of a terrifying inevitability. Suddenly, the shadows in the corner of the room elongated and detached themselves from the wall, pooling together into a tall, elegant female form. Nephthys stepped out of the darkness, her skin the color of twilight, wearing a dress of indigo that matched the smudge on the lock perfectly. She had a bored expression, her wings folded behind her back like a cape made of midnight air. The goddess tapped the scroll against her chin, looking around the dusty library with an air of supreme indifference mixed with mild curiosity. I borrowed this to check a spelling error in the fourth gate spell. It was frankly embarrassing to read. She sighed deeply, the sound echoing like wind through a tomb, and fixed her glowing eyes on the trembling archivist. You mortals always forget to like and subscribe to the proper pronunciation guides, and it makes a journey terribly awkward for the soul. She floated slightly above the floor, the silver threads in her linen wrappings pulsing with a soft, ethereal light. It was clear that to her, the great library was nothing more than a convenient bookshelf to be raided at will. I have returned it now, but do tell your scribes that eternal is spelled with a different determinative in the Netherworld. She extended her hand, and the scroll floated gently through the air, landing softly in Kia's open palms. The air in the room grew heavy with the scent of myrrh and ancient rain, marking the presence of the divine. Nephthys vanished back into the shadows before Kia could even stammer a thank you, leaving only silence behind. Kia caught the scroll with trembling hands, bowing so low her nose nearly brushed the dusty floor. She quickly inspected the document, noting that the goddess had indeed corrected the grammar in the margins using a shimmering ink. The vizier was a stickler for details, and he would likely appreciate the divine editing. High Priest Mentu swept back into the room, his torch casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to chase him across the floor. He looked expecting to find an empty chest, his mouth already open to deliver a lecture on incompetence. Without a word, Kia extended her hand and offered him the scroll, the parchment gleaming softly in the dim torchlight. Mintu snatched it with a grunt of surprise, checking the seal quickly before hurrying out into the night to begin the rites. The next morning, the library was quiet again, just the way Kia liked it. She sat at her desk organizing the scrolls, but she left a small bowl of fresh water and indigo powder in the shadowy corner. She felt a cool breeze brush past her ear, a silent acknowledgement from the dark, and smiled to herself. It was good to know she had a powerful friend in high and low places.